Hi everyone, this is Sarah Dean. Today I'm going to very briefly introduce the four main tissue types of the body, and I'm going to focus on the two that create the coverings and the lining membranes of the body, such as skin. So the four main tissue types, there is epithelial tissue, there's connective tissue, there's muscle tissue, and there's nervous tissue. All right, so epithelial tissue, we can say, if I were to give you the cliff notes of each of these tissue types, epithelial tissue, you could say its main job is to be a covering, is to cover. So, cover. Of course, that's an oversimplification. All of these tissue types have more than one function, but again, these are the cliff notes. So this is sort of like your cheat, your quick one-word reduction of what these tissue types do. So connective tissue, then you could say supports. That's its main function. Muscle tissue moves. And nervous tissue controls. Oops. All right. Because, nervous tissue, that's like your brain, and then all the nerves that are conduits for messages between the brain and body. So nervous tissue controls. So the two tissue types that make up the linings and coverings of the body are epithelial tissue and connective tissue. These make up lining and covering membranes. Now, any structure in the body that's made up of more than one tissue type that are working together for the same purpose, we call that an organ. So an organ is a specialized structure in the body made up of more than one tissue type. Here we have two tissue types. So we have epithelial tissue and connective tissue. Because of that, we could call the covering and lining membranes of the body a simple organ, which means that your skin is an organ. We think of the skin as very static. It's just this, just a cover, and it doesn't really do much except separate the inside and outside, but that's not true. It's actually more dynamic than that. It has a lot of functions. It has excretions. So it does have more dynamic functions than just existing as a cover. And maybe that can help you remember that it is an organ, not just an inanimate structure, but rather this living, breathing organ that functions for your benefit. So there's three different types of lining and covering membranes. The first is cutaneous, or cutaneous. Cutaneous membranes are dry. This is just your skin. So it's dry, and its main function is to be a protective barrier. It separates the inside from the outside of the body. It excretes antimicrobial compounds. It sweats to keep you cool, right? So that's why I said the covering component, that's a little bit of an oversimplification. Your skin also has an important role in cooling you off, things like that. So, so the cutaneous membrane is your skin. That's the main example here, the only example. Okay. And from this cutaneous membrane, you also have hair. Other animals have scales, right? All right, so then we have mucous membranes. So mucous membranes are moist because the membrane itself excretes mucus. So it's moist because of these secretions. And you find this membrane in places that are inside the body but open to the outside. The mucous membrane keeps them moist as sort of like protection, and that moisture is also important for the function of mucous membranes, because mucous membranes are places where the inside of the body is exchanging materials with the outside. So you find this in places, so cavities, body cavities, open to the outside. and their function is exchange of materials. Between the inside and the outside of the body. So some examples of mucous membranes would be in the respiratory tract. Because, so, if you think about your lungs, you have all these, the air you breathe in from the outside goes into your lungs through all of this piping system, and then they end up in these alveoli, which are little grape-looking structures, and the membrane surrounding the alveoli is less than paper thin. It's thinner than a piece of paper. And that thinness is important because you're exchanging material through the membrane, so it has to be really thin to allow oxygen to move in through the membrane and carbon dioxide to move out through that membrane. And the moisture helps keep its structure intact, so it doesn't dry out and break. There's also antimicrobial functions in that moist mucous membrane to protect your respiratory system. Even though that membrane is so thin, that thinness makes it vulnerable, so that mucus helps protect it. So the respiratory system is essential for, the respiratory system is a mucous membrane, and that's essential for exchange between the inside and the outside. And another place you see this is the GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract. So you can, actually, I'm running out of space here, so let me put this on the same line. So gastrointestinal tract. So you're like one long convoluted donut. Mouth to anus, it's just one long hole, right? And so in reality, your gastrointestinal tract is kind of outside your body. It's not where your blood is. It's a long hole through the center of your body. And that has to be a mucous membrane. And so the mucus, again, it's protective to those membranes that mostly function for exchange of materials. So you have, through much of your gastrointestinal tract, you're absorbing nutrients from your food. And then the last mucous membrane is going to be the urogenital. It's going to be found in the urogenital tract. So the urinary tract is for excretion, right, from the inside to the outside world. And then your reproductive system is also about exchange of materials in a different way. It's about exchange of genetic materials. So there's also a lot of other secretions that go along with that, right, that facilitate the exchange, the reception or the donation of genetic material. But you get the idea. So these are all parts of the body that are open to the outside world because they're designed to exchange material with the outside world. All right, so then we have the last type of lining covering membrane is serous membranes. And they're also sometimes known as serosei. All right. These are also moist. And you find them in internal cavities, completely internal cavities, and they line internal organs that are not at all open to the outside world. And their job is to reduce friction as those organs move against each other. So, for example, your heart is always beating at the moment, even in utero, your heart's been beating. Now, it's surrounded by other material, of course, and so it could create a lot of inflammation if there was too much friction every time it beat. And so the heart is lined with a serous membrane, with a serosei, and that prevents frictions. So it's slick, it allows it to beat without you even feeling it, actually. So we find these in closed ventral body cavities. My allergies are horrible right now. The juniper is blooming, and it always destroys me every year. All right, so sorry for my sniffles. So this is a moist membrane. It's in closed ventral body cavities, and its job is to reduce friction. Caused by organ movement. So of organ movement, we'll say. So I already gave you the example of the heart. The heart has a serous membrane called the pericardium. Running out of space here. The lungs also, so you've been breathing since the day you were born, and your lungs expand quite a lot and contract, and again, if they were, they're moving against a whole bunch of other stuff in there, and so if there was all this friction, you'd get inflammation, and you would be in pain every time you breathed. In the case of the heart, you'd be in pain every time the heart beat. So in the case of the lungs are covered with a serosa, and it's called the pleurae. And the last one is in the abdominopelvic cavity. So all the organs in the abdominopelvic cavity are covered by the same serosa. So that, it's because, so if you think about your intestines are incredibly dynamic. They're squishing food and moving it through, and they move a lot, and you don't even notice it. And again, that's because there's no friction because of the serosa that they're covered with. So say abdominopelvic viscera, that just means those organs down there. And that one, really running out of space here, that one is called the peritoneum. All right. So those are the lining and covering membranes of the body. The next video, I'm going to focus on the two tissues, well, the first of the two tissues. So the next two videos will focus on first epithelial tissue and then on connective tissue. And so we'll get a deep dive into each of those tissue types that create these lining and covering membranes.